About 2 years ago, my wife and I went on a road trip out west. We were going to California, and our plan was to drive so that we could stop at some cool places along the way. But in order to stay on task, we decided to book Airbnbs ahead of time instead of hotels. We had used the app several times before, and we liked the way that it worked. On the first day of our trip, we drove for about 8 hours from the early morning into the afternoon. We arrived at our first Airbnb and contacted the host. He was an older man who was using his old cabin as an Airbnb after it got remodeled. He was able to remotely unlock the doors for us. The Airbnb was a really old cabin-looking house that was near some woods as well as mountains. It was a little bit isolated and had a great view, which is the reason why my wife and I picked it. It was just as we had expected, and it looked very nice. Inside the house, it looked like it had some remodeling done to have the modern features, but still have an old feel to it. There was a large kitchen, a living room, and then a bedroom. After we arrived, we walked around the property a little, and then we went inside to unpack a few things. As we were in the bedroom unpacking, we heard a noise coming from the kitchen. It sounded like somebody walking across the hardwood floor. I walked out of the room to see what it was, but when I did, nobody was there. I found it strange because we were supposed to have the place all to ourselves, and I didn't think anybody would be there. We decided to brush it off, and after we were done unpacking, we went to the local city to explore for a while. We came back later that night and were pretty tired, but as soon as we pulled into the drive for the house, we noticed that the light in the living room window was on. There were shades covering the window so we couldn't see inside, but we could clearly see that the light was on. I was sure I had turned it off before we left. My wife and I stayed in the car and looked at the window, remembering the noises we heard earlier. Then we saw the shades get pulled back for a second, and as clear as day, a man looked directly at us from the window. It clearly was not our host. The man looked up at us for about 5 seconds, and then disappeared behind the shades again. We were very alarmed now, and did not want to go back inside. I decided to call the Airbnb host to ask him if he knew anything about what was going on. When we called, the man seemed surprised and asked us to describe the man to him. After I told him what we had seen, he told us that it was an exact description of his son. Then he told us that his son had passed away about 15 years ago, and we were not the only people to have seen him there. This gave me the chills, and my wife and I decided to get our things and leave. We spent that night in a hotel instead. Last summer, me and 5 of my friends all went on a trip together. We are all women in our early 20s, and because there were so many of us, we got an Airbnb house that was very nice and had enough space to accommodate us all. It was a 3-bedroom house, so we still had to share bedrooms, but there would only be 2 of us in each room, which wasn't that bad. Upstairs had basically just 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. It was my friend Jessica and me in 1 bedroom, Carly and Taylor in the 2nd, and Alyssa and Brooke in the 3rd. The downstairs of the house had a large kitchen, living room, and a bedroom. It was a very open and modern house. We rented it on Airbnb from a man named Robert. He was said to own several large houses in the area and used them all as Airbnbs. We had the place rented for 5 days and were happy to see that it looked just like the photos when we got there. After we all arrived at the house, we hung out there for a while and then went to the city for the night. It was a great night and we had lots of fun. When we got back, we were all pretty tired and pretty much just went to our rooms and fell asleep. The next morning, we all went down to a local breakfast place when we got up. When we were talking, one of my friends, Carly, mentioned how she thought she heard some noises in her bedroom when she was trying to fall asleep. Our friend Taylor, who was the other girl to sleep in that bedroom, said she fell asleep pretty quick, but did remember hearing the noises as well, but she thought that it was Carly. We talked and joked around about this for a while, that the house was haunted or somebody broke in. Carly maintained that she heard something, but also laughed it off with the rest of us. That day was another fun one. We went back to the city as well as to some local parks and kept busy until late night again. We all arrived back on the second night at about midnight. Once again, we were pretty tired and went to our rooms to go to sleep. Each bedroom had 2 beds in it, and I got into mine and Jessica got into hers. We shut off the lights and tried to fall asleep. But just about a minute after the lights went out, I heard a noise. I ignored it at first, but then I heard it again. It sounded like something brushing against the floor. I couldn't quite tell where it was coming from, but I knew it was in the room. It was completely dark in there, but I knew it wasn't Jessica because I would have heard her get out of her bed. I sat up and asked her what the noise was. She replied that she wasn't sure and then let out a nervous laugh. We laid there silent for a couple of seconds. Everything remained quiet. After a few minutes, I laid back down and closed my eyes to try to get some sleep. But shortly after I did, I heard the noise once again. I really couldn't tell where it was coming from. Then I saw the flashlight to Jessica's phone turn on, and seconds after that, I heard her scream. Then she yelled my name. I asked her what was going on. She was pointing to underneath my bed. I jumped off the end of my bed and we both ran to the doorway. I turned and looked behind me. I could see under the bed was a man's face staring back at us. It looked like he was getting up, so we shut the door and ran to wake up the other girls. We got into the first room and woke them up, and then we all went into the third. But once we were in there, we heard the door down the hall start to open. We decided not to go out and stay in the room and call the police. All 6 of us were in this bedroom, and we all wanted to leave, but we knew the man was still out there. We heard footsteps, and eventually there was a knock on our door. Taylor yelled that we had called the police, and they were on their way. Then the man spoke. He started apologizing, saying there was a misunderstanding. He said that he was Robert, and he owned the Airbnb, and asked us just to let him in the room. We refused, and then we heard him walk away. A few minutes later, the police showed up. Robert was nowhere to be found. However, we were in his house, and we had the ad to show the police, so they had his information. We all went to a hotel for the rest of our trip, and Robert was found the next day. It creeps me out to think that Robert had been in the house spying on us probably the whole time we were in there. A couple of years back, my friend Adam and I took a trip to Florida. He was really into the Airbnb app and said he used it all the time when he traveled. He said we should use it to find our place to stay during the trip. I didn't know much about it, but I decided why not and let him make the arrangements. Adam found a nice little house that we could stay in for a really good price. It looked pretty old, but had a nice character to it and seemed to be maintained well from the pictures. When we arrived, we met the owner, who was a nice lady named Jen. She gave us the key and told us a little bit about the place before leaving. We went inside and unpacked our stuff and then watched some TV. Adam set up his laptop and did a little bit of work. We had plans for the next day, but nothing for that night, so we were just hanging out. When it started to get late, we decided to go to bed. The house had 2 bedrooms, but was only 1 level. We each went into a bedroom and went to bed. The next morning, when we got up, we noticed that the lights were on in the living room. I was sure I had turned them off before bed. I would say about 80% sure. We had to get going though, and I didn't really have time to worry about it, so we just got ready and left. When we returned back later in the day, we noticed right away that our stuff was all messed up. The things we had brought were scattered throughout the floor. Now we knew something was going on. I decided to call Jen and tell her. When she answered the phone, I explained that our things had been messed up and we thought a light had been turned on during the night as well. She said she didn't know what to tell us. She said only us and her had access to the house and she never had any problems before. We decided to look around the house for ourselves. It wasn't a very big house, pretty much just a couple of bedrooms, a bathroom, kitchen, and a living room. There were a few closets that we looked in as well, but we saw nothing. Then we noticed that the house had an attic. It was located at the end of the hallway near the bedrooms. I decided to go into it and look. I got a chair and stood on it and opened the hatch. I saw that it was very dark up there and pretty much just looked like a crawl space. My eyes adjusted to the dark pretty quickly, but as soon as they did, I saw movement. I squinted and then saw a man crawling towards me at a fast speed. I quickly ducked out of the attic and shut the door. The man tried to open it, but I held it shut. Adam looked very surprised. I told him there was a man up there. He took out his phone to call the police. Meanwhile, I was trying to hold the attic door shut while the man was trying to open it. I could feel that he was pretty strong, and I was hanging on as hard as I could, but I knew I couldn't hang on much longer. Then he began banging on the door. I asked Adam to help me. He grabbed onto the door as well, but when he did, the man pulled really hard and broke it open. He charged down and landed on top of us. There was a struggle, and I just remember the man being really dirty and slamming me to the ground. Adam tried to help me, but wasn't much of a fighter. He got shoved to the side, and the man sprinted past us and out the door. When the police arrived about 10 minutes later, of course the man was long gone. We told them all we could, but they were never able to locate him that I am aware of. I think it was a homeless guy living up there, but I'm not sure. I'm just glad he didn't hurt us. He really just wanted to get away. But I'll never book an Airbnb